Hi, everyone. Ashley Mailloux, David Aragona here to take a look back at this weekend, and specifically the race that we were all talking about, looking forward to, was the Breeders' Cup Classic on Saturday. And obviously, David, big performances both Friday and Saturday, but the Classic, in terms of a topic of discussion, was an important one. And before the gates even opened, the topic was sovereignty scratching.
Yeah, no, it was a real bummer earlier in the week to hear that news that Sovereignty came down with the temperature after shipping and he was going to be coming out of the race. And I know people were billing this as maybe one of the greatest classics in the past 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. You heard all different takes on that. And obviously, him coming out took away some of the excitement from the race. But you still had the top three finishers from the 2024 Classic coming back in 2025, which is pretty cool in and of itself in this day and age in racing. And they completed the trifecta once again, just in a different order.
Yeah, you mentioned go back to last year. Leone was able to win over Fierceness and Forever Young, and that got a little jumbled here. We'll take a look at the replay from the Breeders' Cup Classic in full, and it's really going to come down to, I think, David, trips and race riding and how this race unfolded. And another hot topic, I guess, was contrary thinking, being the quote-unquote rabbit in this field. And while he gets a forward trip in here, in terms of the fractions, I don't think they were necessarily as quick as some might have thought.
Yeah, I know there was a lot of discussion around whether or not the rabbit should have been in this race, what sort of impact he was going to have. That was all sort of negated once they broke from the starting gate, and Florent Giroux didn't open up 5 lengths or go 44 to the half like some people expected him to. He really had very little impact on this race at all. And I think all of the major contenders got into the spots they wanted to be positioned in. I think the only horse that was maybe affected at the start was Baeza, who broke maybe a length slowly. He had to make a wide move because he was out of position early. But everybody else who was a major player in this race, I think they got the trip that they wanted. Even Sierra Leone, who was far back early, Flavien Prat was able to make an early move to get him positioned relatively close to the pace. So the horses were in their positions, but you could see the two horses that are in closest attendance to that rabbit, Forever Young and Fierceness, they're alongside each other, but Forever Young is always keeping Fierceness pinned in that spot behind the pace setter.
I just think this is superb race riding. This is part of the tactics, right? You know, you have a horse, you know he's going to be one of your major rivals. How can you make it a little bit more difficult on him? And it was nothing bad that was done by the rider. It was just a very smart move to be mindful of that. And obviously, Mindframe brings himself into this race a little bit, which I actually think helps Forever Young to have horses on his inside and his outside to keep him going. And while others will try to move, that includes journalism in this spot. You can see Fierceness still is kind of trying to work out that trip behind. It's not working for him.
No, I mean, he is behind horses and he's caught in traffic. And I'm sure Johnny would have liked to move a little earlier than he did, sort of akin to the move that he made in the Pacific Classic around the far turn. But they turn into the stretch here. Fierceness is going to be able to get out once Mindframe vacates that position. You could see him angling out between horses. But by this point, Forever Young has already taken over. And we know Forever Young is a horse that loves to win races. He is very hard to pass in the late stages when he gets his head in front. And Sierra Leone comes lunging at him. Fierceness couldn't really produce a kick even once he got into the clear, and Forever Young able to hold on to the late stages and get that first ever Breeders' Cup Classic victory for Japan.
It's been very tough for Forever Young. He has ran very, very well stateside, but it just hasn't been able to necessarily get it done. And as we take a look at his past performances here, you'll see that. But I think what you also see in terms of the way that he came into this race this year, David, it was a little bit of a mindful sort of trip here. Obviously, he had the race in Saudi. He had the Dubai World Cup. They gave him plenty of time off, and just that one run leading into the Breeders' Cup, I really think set him up for a huge performance.
It did. It was the perfect preparation. This was a horse that had a hard campaign from last year's Breeders' Cup Classic right on through the winter, arguably running one of the best dirt races we saw anywhere in the world when he won the Saudi Cup last February. They gave him plenty of time to recover from that, and he appeared to be back at his peak for this Breeders' Cup Classic. And I don't know about you, Ashley. I know that these three horses maybe didn't captivate the fans as much as Sovereignty did through the summer, but I've become a big fan of the rivalry among these three. We've seen them face off now in 3 races, the Kentucky Derby, and then the last 2 Breeders' Cup Classics. They've changed positions every time, and they've all got different attributes to them. And Forever Young, he is just the kind of horse that can pull any kind of trip. He's always going to give a really hard try. You could see that in his lifetime past performances, and he is a horse that you could see is very game and really wants it, and that attribute was on display last Saturday.
And you can see that in his record, 10 for 13 now, and look at the purse earnings. Whole hell of a lot of money, to say the least. But as we move to the other 2 you're alluding to, Sierra Leone and Fierceness, and their past performances also extremely strong. Obviously, Sierra Leone will see him kind of cap things off there in the Breeders' Cup Classic. And I think he ran his race, but I think this is what has typically gotten him beat is his running style. He needs to roll from off of it. I do think, while the Rabbit was in here, they didn't go as fast as they did in the prior edition of the Breeders' Cup Classic. At least they didn't do that early, which I think maybe impacted him a bit. But I just think when you look at him versus Forever Young was the better horse that day.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Whereas last year's pace was a supersonic early pace that set up for a deep closer like him. This year's pace, I mean, it seemed honest. I mean, sub 46 to the half is certainly moving along, but a whole field was bunched. It didn't come apart the way that Sierra Leone really needed to be successful here. And I don't know about you, Ashley. I watched the end of that race and then the gallop out afterwards. Sierra Leone never went by Forever Young, even though he had momentum coming to the finish line. Forever Young dug in again and galloped out about 5 lengths ahead of Sierra Leone. So Sierra Leone just isn't that kind of horse that always is going to get his head in front of the wire under all circumstances. But you can see from his career record, he is just the picture of consistency. He's never finished off the board, and that's a nice horse to have in the barn.
And for Fierceness, he was a horse that I think people either you love him or you don't like him, and that's saying it nicely. And he's a horse that he will perform exceptionally well, and once in a while he throws a race which is a little bit of a head scratcher, which I think kind of makes the case for whether you like him or you don't. But I do think, the concern going into the Classic was the post. They didn't want the inside again after what happened in the previous effort at Del Mar. But I think he ran his race and he still ran exceptionally well in defeat, but he just wasn't, a match for the top two.
Yeah, I talked about these 3 horses all being different from each other. I mean, Sierra Leone and Forever Young have that consistency, maybe different in terms of the heart department, but Fierceness, he's the kind of horse that lacks consistency. So it's a little tough to be a fan of him because you never know what you're going to get from race to race, and he can throw in some head scratchers, but on his best day, he's arguably the most brilliant of the 3. And maybe he didn't get the chance to show that in his swan song, this Breeders' Cup Classic. He was, locked in behind horses and rallying in the final 8th of a mile. That's not really the kind of trip that he wants to pull. He still ran a nice race, and it was good to see him put together back-to-back top efforts for the final 2 races of his career. I'll be kind of sad to see a couple of these horses go off to stud. It does sound like we might see Forever Young in the future, though, again.
And as we kind of move the discussion now, post Breeders' Cup Classic, the next topic of conversation will be Horse of the Year. And part of this puzzle is the fact that Sovereignty was unable to run in the Classic. He spiked a fever. We know what he was able to do this year and sort of decimate his competition. You look at the Derby and you look at his races following that. You put him into the equation. How do you think Horse of the Year will unfold? Or are you torn? I'm personally torn, David. I could see this going a couple of ways.
I think that if Fierceness or Sierra Leone had won the Classic, there would be a stronger argument for one of them to maybe usurp Sovereignty as Horse of the Year. But with Forever Young winning the Classic and only making 1 start in the U.S. this year, even though he's kind of a horse that's thought of as, a U.S. regular because he came a couple times last year, in 2025, he just made the 1 trip, and it's hard to make a horse like that Horse of the Year. So I feel like it probably is just Sovereignty by default. He obviously would have been a more perfect candidate if he had run in the Classic and won the Classic, because you always wonder about a horse's legacy when they never face older horses, and that's the case for him. I hope we get to see him on the racetrack again. I don't know if that's going to be the case, but I really hope, because he's a horse that has such immense talent. It would be a shame if he never got to face older horses.
And I agree completely with everything that you said. I think, kind of looking at social media, a couple folks are maybe saying, well, now do you consider Forever Young? I really think it's tough to make that decision based on that 1 performance this year, which you mentioned. I think obviously he beat the rest of that field and did it very, very well, but there was no Sovereignty. At the same time, when you look at Sovereignty's body of work this year, the Derby and the following races, to me, he probably did more than enough to deserve the honors. But I would have loved to seen all of these horses in the starting gate this past Saturday.
100%.
So it'd be very interesting to see how that turns out. But I think, David, overall, I thought the Classic, it exceeded my expectations after the scratch of Sovereignty. I know that was sort of a disappointment to many race fans. We wanted to see that, but the stretch run was still a pretty good one.
Yeah, it was a really exciting race to watch from a tactical standpoint when they all hooked up at the top of the stretch. I mean, that's the kind of Breeders' Cup Classic you want, when the best horses are running out their best. And personally, I've been a fan of Forever Young going way back to his 2-year-old season. It was nice to see him finally get this big victory, and it seemed like it really meant a lot to the connections and his home country.
That's how David and I see the Breeders' Cup Classic in our discussions on the Horse of the Year. But we'd love to know what you think. Who deserves the Horse of the Year honors for 2025? Leave us a comment. I'm always curious to see what people think. So thanks for watching.